Australia Day is a divided public holiday across the country. Today, January the 26th, commemorates the landing of Britain's first fleet on the continent. But it is also a painful reminder for many Indigenous communities. Many of them want Australia Day to be renamed. Others are calling it to not be held on this date at all. An essential poll commissioned by The Guardian has found a rise in the number of people who support a new date. More than 26% voted yes, an increase from last year's 20%. Another survey done by the conservative think tank Institute of Public Affairs is also seeing more people who are comfortable with the date change. Nearly 40% out of 1,000 respondents agreed, 7% higher than the result 2 years ago. However, there appears to be more reluctance when it comes to changing the name of the national holiday. A Roy Morgan SMS poll asked more than 1,000 locals if it should be known as Australia Day or Invasion Day, and nearly two-thirds opted for the former. So joining us live from Rockhampton is Dr. Benjamin Jones, Senior Lecturer of History at Central Queensland University. Doctor, why are more young Australians in particular turning their backs on the national holiday? Have you observed a growing wave of discontent for some time now?
Yes, there absolutely has been an increase in people who do not feel comfortable anymore celebrating Australia Day on the 26th of January. And it's important to note, though, that most Australians do feel that there should be a national holiday and there should be a day to celebrate the good things about living in Australia. But increasingly, 26th January being the day the British flag was hoisted and being the start of British colonisation and dispossession of First Nations, there's a growing move that the celebration should be on a different day, and 26th January should be a day of sober reflection.
Doctor, the campaign to change the name or change the date has been gaining momentum, as you say. It has the support of celebrities, public figures, but it's not the position of the Labour government. And what about the opposition as well?
It's not currently the position of the government or the opposition. This is a social movement, really, and we're observing social change in how Australians view their history and view their past. And it will likely be something that when enough of the population demand a change to be happening, then the government will respond. The politically safe thing for both the government and the opposition is just to keep things as they are for now. But increasingly, it's just a day that people aren't comfortable celebrating. So it's a day that divides many Australians, and that's the opposite of what it's meant to do. And particularly when you contrast it with the 26th of January in India, where they celebrate independence for their country. Australia, oddly enough, is celebrating the day that First Nations were dispossessed. So it's not a particularly patriotic day.
Doctor, under what circumstance do you see the government capitulating or bending to this grassroots movement?
Well, the government always has its eye on polls, and governments are usually pragmatic enough to try and weigh up issues by how many votes they might gain and how many votes they may lose. But it's a very uncomfortable day at the moment, and there have been what I would call band-aid solutions by trying to change the tone of the day. But I think certainly when you see those polls getting up to 50% or more who want a new day, then the government will have to act. But also, Australia is considering becoming a republic again, and that may be a referendum that happens. And if Australia becomes a republic on a different day of the year, then that also may give the government of the day an easy alternative and say, well, let's have it on this day because that's a logical day to celebrate a national holiday.
And Doctor, tell us a bit more about the referendum on the voice to Parliament. Why do protesters think it's an ineffective measure in making sure that Indigenous peoples are permanently represented in government?
Well, there are a range of views on the voice. It's important to realise that this isn't a government initiative. This is a First Nations-led initiative, and from one of the largest and most significant gatherings of First Nations people came together with this process. And the first step in it of the Uluru Statement is to have a voice for First Nations people recognised in the Constitution. And polls suggest that a strong majority of Australians actually support it. There are opponents, both from the conservative right and also from the left. On the left, some say that it doesn't go far enough, and the conservative side say that they don't want a different set of rules for different Australians, and we should all be equal as citizens. So there are two camps of opposition, but there is at the moment a majority of support for a voice.
And not all Indigenous senators agree with this constitutionally enshrined voice being the right path forward. Some are saying the problem is that Australians don't know the real history of the treatment of Indigenous peoples. Some say they want a treaty instead. So, Doctor, what do you think is a workable solution to take this forward?
Well, ultimately, Australia is a democracy and we have a democratic constitution, and it's a constitution which not even the parliament can change. It can only change for a referendum where all Australians or adult Australian citizens vote. So ultimately, it will be a decision for the Australian people. The government of the day will put forward what they think is the wording most likely to be successful. But ultimately, it's not up to senators and it's not up to MPs. The voice will go to the Australian people and they'll decide whether the Constitution changes.
All right, Doctor, thank you very much for your insights. That was Dr. Benjamin Jones, Senior Lecturer of History at Central Queensland University.